The Krell Warmaster stood on the bridge of his flagship, mandibles clicking in what his species considered laughter. Before him, holographic displays showed crude human vessels, metal tubes propelled by controlled explosions, firing solid projectiles like some ancient relic from the Stone Age. "They still use kinetic weapons," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Chemical propellants, explosive warheads, their largest vessels barely achieve 0.3 light speed." He turned to his tactical officer. "Tell me, Vex, how did such a primitive species even achieve spaceflight?" Vexthar consulted his datapad, his silver eyes narrowing. "Intelligence suggests they've been spacefaring for less than 3 centuries, Warmaster. They lack plasma technology, graviton manipulation, or even basic quantum shielding. Their armor is metal alloys, refined ore, Warmaster. They wrap their soldiers in processed minerals." The bridge crew erupted in clicking laughter. The Krell had conquered 47 systems in the past decade. Their plasma lances could ionize a cruiser from 200,000 kilometers. Their shields could withstand anything short of a stellar flare. And now they faced an enemy that still used gunpowder. "How many ships do they have in the system?" the Warmaster asked. 37 capital ships, maybe 200 smaller craft. Their flagship is broadcasting on primitive radio frequencies. They're calling it the U.S. Indomitable. Vexthar's mandibles twitched. "They're demanding we withdraw from their colony world." The Warmaster's laugh was a harsh rasp. "Demanding? These humans believe they can make demands of the Krell Armada?" He straightened, his exoskeleton gleaming under the bridge lights. "Open a channel. Let's inform them of their mistake before we erase them from this system." But deep in his neural cortex, where instinct lived beneath conscious thought, something whispered a warning. The Krell had ruled their home system for 10,000 years before reaching the stars. They'd evolved on a world of moderate gravity, temperate climate, and abundant resources. Their wars had been calculated affairs, fought with precision and honor codes that stretched back millennia. They knew nothing of deathworlds, nothing of evolution forged in violence. Admiral Marcus Chen stood in the Combat Information Center of the Indomitable, watching the Krell formation with cold calculation. 30 years of service, from the Mars Rebellion to the Titan blockade, had taught him one fundamental truth: overconfident enemies made fatal mistakes. "Sir, they're hailing us," Lieutenant Park reported. "Audio only." "Put it through." The alien voice was synthesized, translated by the ship's computer into flat, emotionless English. "Human vessels, you are outmatched and outclassed. Your technology is primitive. Your weapons are obsolete. Withdraw your colony from this world within 1 solar rotation, or we will remove it for you." Chen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Lieutenant, what's the status of the Nelson and the Patton?" "In position, sir. The Krell haven't detected them. Their sensors are, well, they're designed for energy signatures. Our stealth coding is just carbon composite and heat sinks. I don't think they're even looking for something that low-tech." "Good." Chen activated the fleet-wide channel. "All ships, this is actual. Remember the doctrine: speed, aggression, and violence of action. They think we're primitives. Let's show them what primitives can do." Chen out. He turned to his communications officer. "Send our response." The reply was simple, drawn from Earth's long history of warfare. "Nuts." The Warmaster stared at his translator, confused. "What does this mean? Nuts?" Before Vexthar could respond, alarm shrieked across the bridge. "Warmaster, energy spikes. The humans are launching. The weapons weren't elegant. They didn't manipulate exotic particles or bend space-time. They were simply tubes of refined uranium wrapped around fusion cores, accelerated to a fraction of light speed by chemical rockets upgraded with human stubbornness. Nuclear-tipped missiles, hundreds of them. The Krell's plasma lances swiveled, burning through the first wave, then the second. But there were so many, and they were so fast, and some of them were just empty shells, decoys made of scrap metal that registered the same as the real warheads. "Point defense is being overwhelmed," Vexthar shouted. "They're saturating our coverage zones." 3 missiles penetrated the defensive screen. 3 was enough. The first detonated against the Warmaster's shields, the nuclear fireball producing an electromagnetic pulse that the Krell's sophisticated systems couldn't filter fast enough. Plasma conduits overloaded. Graviton generators went into emergency shutdown. The second missile hit bare hull. 60 megatons of spine-splitting atoms vaporized a quarter of the ship's superstructure. The third missile didn't explode. It didn't need to. Traveling at 30 kilometers per second, its depleted uranium core simply punched through the wounded flagship like a bullet through paper, tumbling end over end, shredding decks and bulkheads with kinetic energy that mocked the very concept of shields. In the Combat Information Center, Admiral Chen watched the Krell flagship break apart and felt nothing but satisfaction. All ships execute Delta 7. Let's finish this. The human fleet didn't maneuver like the Krell expected. They didn't maintain formation integrity or follow predictable engagement patterns. Instead, they scattered like startled fish, each vessel operating independently, using thrust vectors that wasted fuel but made targeting solutions impossible to predict. The U.S. Nelson and U.S. Patton revealed themselves, emerging from the debris field of the colony's orbital infrastructure, where they'd been hiding, cold and silent, for 3 days. Their railgun spoke with electromagnetic fury, hurling tungsten telephone poles at velocities that made them effectively undetectable until impact. A Krell destroyer simply ceased to exist, its bow and stern separating as the penetrator carved through its center. Warmaster Krell Vex, promoted by catastrophe, watched his fleet die and couldn't understand. The humans were everywhere and nowhere. They used their primitive reaction drives to make microburns that rendered Krell targeting computers useless. They fired their crude kinetic weapons in overwhelming salvos that ignored elegant tactics in favor of sheer brutal mathematics. And they were winning. "Fall back," he ordered. "All ships, retreat to rally point. Warmaster, they're between us and the jump point." Impossible. The humans were slower. They couldn't have, but they had. While the Krell had admired their own superiority, human ships had been burning hard, using every drop of fuel, pushing their crews to the edge of blackout, positioning themselves not where they were expected, but where they were needed. On the surface of the colony world, Krell shock troops faced a different nightmare. They deployed in formation, energy weapons ready, expecting the human militia to break and scatter. Instead, they found mines, crude, simple devices buried in the soil, explosive charges wrapped in ball bearings triggered by pressure plates made of scrap metal. The first wave of Krell infantry was shredded by technology that predated spaceflight. Then came the mortars, indirect fire weapons that lobbed explosive shells in high arcs, striking from behind cover. The Krell's personal shields were designed to stop directed energy weapons. They did nothing against chunks of exploding steel that came from above, and then came the humans themselves, not in neat formations but in small teams that moved through the terrain like predators, using cover and concealment that warriors from a low-gravity garden world couldn't comprehend. They coordinated with hand signals when radio was jammed. They fought from buildings, from tunnels, from positions that couldn't be easily targeted from above. One squad held a warehouse for 6 hours against an entire company of Krell. They used tripwires, improvised explosives, overlapping fields of fire, and a stubbornness that bordered on insanity. When they finally retreated, they collapsed the building behind them, burying 50 Krell in rubble. The last transmission from the Krell ground commander was simple. They don't fight like civilized beings. They fight like the planet itself is trying to kill us. He wasn't wrong. Humans had evolved on a death world where everything, the weather, the predators, the diseases, even the plants, had tried to kill them for millions of years. They'd learned to fight with everything they had, to turn any material into a weapon, to never, ever give up. In orbit, the last Krell ships burned for the jump point, running from an enemy that shouldn't have been able to touch them. They left behind 37 destroyed vessels and thousands of dead. The human fleet had lost 8 ships and counted themselves lucky. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the Krell flee, and allowed himself a moment of exhaustion. Signal the fleet. Secure the system. Begin recovery operations. He paused, then added, "And someone find out what nuts means in Krell. I want them to understand the insult." Lieutenant Park looked up from her console, a fierce grin on her face. "Sir, we're receiving transmissions from nearby systems. The Krell are broadcasting warnings about us. They're telling the whole sector to avoid human space. What are they saying? They're calling us the kinetic species. They say we're too dangerous to engage because we don't fight rationally. We use weapons that should be obsolete but aren't. We don't follow proper warfare doctrine. She laughed. Sir, I think we just became the galaxy's boogeyman. Chen nodded slowly. Good. Let them fear. Let them spread the word across the stars. Humanity had clawed its way up from the gravity well of a world that had tried to murder them for eons. They'd turned every limitation into an advantage, every primitive technology into a weapon, every disaster into a lesson. They didn't have plasma lances or graviton shields. They had mathematics, chemistry, and physics applied with maximum prejudice. They had the tactical creativity born from 10,000 years of humans fighting other humans in every environment their homeworld could offer. They had the sheer bloody-minded refusal to quit that came from evolving under conditions that would have crushed a softer species. 3 months later, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The Krell delegate, nursing wounds both physical and political, stood before the assembly and spoke words that would echo through recorded history. We believed their weapons were primitive. We were wrong. It's not about the sophistication of the tool, it's about the mind wielding it. The humans have been fighting for survival since before they discovered fire. War isn't something they do, it's something they are. He paused, his mandibles clicking nervously. Honored delegates, I propose we accept the human petition for membership immediately and never ever give them a reason to point those primitive weapons at us again. The motion passed unanimously. Humanity joined the galactic community not as equals but as something more concerning, victors who'd won using weapons the galaxy had abandoned millennia ago, proving that sometimes the oldest lessons are the ones you forget at your peril. Never underestimate the species that turned controlled explosions into a spaceflight program. Never mock the warriors who've been fighting since before civilization had a name. And never, ever start a war with someone who's had billions of years to perfect the art of not dying. The humans had sent a message to the galaxy, written, "In kinetic energy and explosive force, we might be primitive, but we're very, very good at it."